Hey guys, so one thing that I've been hearing repeatedly in my community of students, parents and teachers in the digital SAT space is that there is a lack of quality content out there. Now, part of the reason is understandable, right? The digital SAT is a pretty new exam. Yeah. And also, just to be clear, I'm not blaming or criticizing or judging anyone or anything that's out there. I'm not that kind of guy. I simply put, right, I don't like to be judged. I don't like to be criticized. I don't like to be blamed. So I will never do that to others. Right? So I'm not that type of person. Instead, what I am is, or the type of person that I am is, I'm a solution-oriented person. Right? So when I heard this issue come up, not just once, 2 times, but multiple times, right? I really wanted to do something to help, is all. And so what I basically did was I kind of created this writing course, this training course, if you will, around the digital SAT writing section. Now, specifically, I'll get into more of the details a little bit later, but one specific point that I do want to mention here is that I personally created 200 actual test questions for the digital SAT writing section. Right? So these are 200 real SAT writing questions, right, that you will receive if you purchase this course. Now, let me just clarify what I mean by the word actual or real. So actual or real doesn't mean that I just copied and pasted these questions from other resources like the College Board or Khan Academy. I didn't do that. What I actually did was I actually studied what was out there very meticulously, a very, very detailed way. And with the help of my assistant, we call him ChatGPT, with the help of AI, right? I really created really relevant, right, or test style questions. What I also did was I took these 200 questions and I showed them to multiple SAT grammar teachers, right? And really wanted to get their opinion or their feedback on what they thought about these questions. And the feedback that I heard was, it looks amazing, looks just like the real thing. Like they couldn't tell the difference, right? And they had a lot of positive things to say about it, right? And I really think only positive things to say about it. So that's really what I mean by the word real or actual here. It's extremely relevant, right? Now, not just in terms of the grammar concepts that the SAT will test you on, but also based on even the level of English on the question prompts, right? On the passages. And also even the topics that students will be reading, right? It comes down to I try to get as detail-oriented as possible to make this test or these questions look as close to the real thing as possible, right? And so that's really what I mean by that word real or actual. Okay, now we'll get into more specifically what this course offers and who this course is designed for a little bit later. But before I do that, I really just wanted to introduce myself, right? Give you a little bit of information about who I am. There I am. Guys, my name is Jin, and if this is our first meeting together, hey, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. So to give you a little bit of context about who I am, I would consider myself a grammar expert, not just self-proclaimed, right, but based on the sort of results that I've gotten on multiple standardized tests for the writing or the grammar portions, right? So I've scored in the top 1 percentile on the SAT, ACT, and the GMAT grammar sections. I've had multiple perfect scores on various exams, right, such as these. I also have over 2 decades of experience in education. The last 13 of these years I've spent in Seoul, South Korea, working with over 7,000 amazing students who attend schools from all over the world, right? And to add to that, little extra cherry on top, I'm also an author. Still can't believe I say that, but I'm an author and a content creator of grammar textbooks, workbooks, practice questions, right? Now, the reason that I'm telling you guys this is not to try to impress you, right? But really, I tell you this to try to impress upon you, right, the idea that I'm extremely passionate and committed to helping students, right, not just survive abroad, but to help international students thrive, right, and flourish while attending schools abroad. Yeah, not just during high school, but also in college, you know. And simply put, you guys, I don't just see my work as a job or even a career. You know, I see my work as kind of like a mission, right? Like I'm on a mission to really help. Yeah. And my specific mission that I wrote out for this specific course was to really help you, the student, boost your SAT scores by training. Keyword is training you to master SAT grammar concepts or questions. Okay. And this just kind of is a microcosm of my sort of larger mission to really help international students, right, improve their level of English so that they thrive not just in high school abroad in an English-speaking country, but also in universities for higher education, right? And that's really my mission, trying to help 3 million students, right, kind of do this. So in order for students, in order for us, in order for anyone, right, to really learn and truly master something, you know, I really think it takes there's two different phases, right? There's two different phases of learnings to achieve mastery. That first phase is what I call knowledge acquisition. Think about this as simply put, the acquiring of knowledge. And that second phase is the application of that knowledge. So applying the knowledge that you acquire, right, to show that you are consistently able to, right, successfully answer, right, questions in this particular case, right, questions for digital SAT writing questions. Okay. Now, one thing that I do want to clarify here, you guys, yeah, is that this course, right, like I mentioned, it's a training course. It's a training course. So this course is not designed, right, for knowledge acquisition. Of course, you are going to acquire some knowledge if you take this course, but knowledge acquisitions to me is more about learning the fundamental concepts, learning the conventions of the English language, right? Learning the rules of grammar and the different ways that the SAT is going to test you on those rules of grammar. That's what I mean by knowledge acquisition. So this course isn't about that. I created a separate course, a foundations and a concept course, right, that's really dedicated to helping students to obtain or acquire that knowledge that they need. Okay. This course, on the other hand, like I mentioned, is a training course. So this course is all about, right, the application, taking the knowledge that you acquire and applying it by solving practice questions. That's what this course is that's what this course is for. So this course, you guys, isn't designed for everyone. So don't just think, oh, if I purchase this one course and only this course, right, I'm going to be able to score in the 99th percentile on the SAT writing section. Yeah, that might be true for some, right? But it's not going to be true for the majority. Okay. If you don't have prior SAT experience or any sort of test prep experience, or if you feel very, very weak with grammar concepts, if you haven't had formal education in grammar, then you're going to need to acquire that knowledge some other way, right? Because this course is all about helping you to become a trained test taker. Okay, so this course is really designed with specific students in mind, which I'll talk about in just a second. Okay, but there's one more thing that I want to talk to you guys about in terms of what this course offers, or simply put, what this course doesn't offer. Okay, so this course does not cover any SAT reading questions. Right, so if you guys know, the digital SAT English portion has both reading comprehension questions and writing grammar questions, right, in the same section. So this course is not going to cover any of those reading comprehension style questions. Right, this course is solely focused on grammar, right, is all. And so these 200 practice questions that you will solve throughout this course will be only, right, based on the grammar concepts that the SAT will test you on. So when you think about the grammar or the writing section concepts, think about them in terms of 3 different categories or 3 different types. right? So one sort of type or one bucket of questions or concepts that the SAT will test you on is punctuation. Okay, so there's 9 specific punctuation marks, right? Like commas, semicolons, single dashes, question marks, apostrophes, parentheses, so on and so forth, that the SAT will generate questions around. So you, as a test taker, have to have thorough knowledge of all of the punctuation rules in order to solve these types of questions successfully. Okay, there's a lot of punctuation rules. The second sort of category, the bucket of questions, is grammar questions, right, or grammar concepts. So think of these as like sentence structure. So if you ever heard of terms like run-on sentences or fragments, right, that's what sentence structure means. But this could also kind of entail like verb questions, like subject-verb agreement, right? You also have verb tenses, as well as like pronouns, right? Possessive pronouns, contractions, relative pronouns, and so forth. Okay, so that's that sort of second bucket or second category of question. And that third category of question is what I call rhetoric, which just simply put just means the art or the style of writing. So there's 2 specific writing style questions that the SAT will test you on here. The first is transition questions, right? So choosing the best transition word, like for example, or therefore, or however, choosing the best or the most precise transition word, in a paragraph, or rhetorical synthesis questions. Now, the point of me showing you guys all of this, right, is this. If you look at this list of concepts and question types, and if you go, man, I only know like what 2 of these are, right, then this course probably isn't for you. Okay, you need something else. This course is designed for a very specific avatar, right, who really wants training, right, for the digital SAT grammar portions, right? So when really thinking through creating this course, I really thought of one specific student's type or avatar, right, that I designed this course for. And I call him or her the untrained test taker. So there are some very specific qualities or traits about this untrained test taker that this course can really help. So one of those characteristics or traits is that this untrained test taker does have prior experience. So they have they have taken test prep like in the past. Or maybe they have, maybe they took it, at a different hagwon. It could be for the ACT grammar, the old SAT, the paper-based grammar, or even the digital SAT writing portion, right? But they have some kind of knowledge, prior knowledge about test prep and grammar, but their issue is that they really struggles to improve their English scores, right? Specifically around grammar questions. Right? Now, the reason why these students kind of struggles to improve their English scores is really, well, several things, but one of those main issues is they have a lack of confidence. Right? So untrained test takers have extremely low confidence in their English ability, specifically around grammar. So when I ask students on a scale of 1 to 10, right, how confident are you with grammar? A lot of the students that I get that I put into this category would say like a 5 or below. Right? Is all. So these guys, because they have such low confidence, right, they're oftentimes very unsure, right? Unsure when solving questions. Okay. And that feeling of uncertainty, right, usually doesn't produce good scores. Okay? Now, one thing that I have to make clear about this caricature or this avatar is that the untrained test taker is not lazy. So these guys aren't lazy. In fact, these guys are extremely motivated. Like they want to get better. It's just that they don't know how to, right? And traditionally, right, like solving practice test after practice test after practice test does not work with this type of student, right? That's because like they need more focused practice. They need to solve 10, 15, 20 questions around one specific concept or question type so that they fully reinforce their knowledge and strengthen their knowledge around that one specific concept before moving on. So these guys, their scores do not improve if they just take practice test after practice test after practice test, right? They need more so focused training, right? So they're looking, and so once these guys get that focused training, right, they not just kind of know, they don't just learn the concepts, but they also are trained, right, to apply that knowledge, in a focused way. These guys, the untrained test takers' scores will skyrocket, right, once they get the sort of training that they need, okay? And so that's really what this course is designed to do, right, is designed for, is to really help that untrained test taker. Now, one more sort of, so like I mentioned before, you guys, and this is a really big point about the untrained test taker, and if this kind of sounds like you, maybe this course might be for you, is the untrained test taker, like I said, because they have prior knowledge studying for test prep, right, they have some grammar concepts, right, kind of floating around in their heads. But if you notice, like in this image, it's all scattered. It's all over the place, right? So maybe they're very, very disorganized, So maybe they know something about commas here, they know something about sentence structure here, they know something about pronouns here, right? But they don't know really how to apply it. They don't know how to take that knowledge out of their minds and apply it successfully when they're solving questions. Instead, these guys just do things more randomly or chaotically. And because their process is so disorganized, they end up being so much more confused. They end up kind of confusing themselves, right? Because of the lack of process, right? The lack of a clear process, And so this training course can really help disorganized students, right? So again, my mission is to help to train students like the 1%, right? So basically what I'm trying to do in essence is I'm just trying to help students to take that knowledge, right? And it's to apply that knowledge so that they know how to solve these questions with confidence and with consistency. Okay, so what students will learn, what you'll learn in this course is you'll learn step-by-step methods or processes to solve each question type. Now guys, this step-by-step sort of system or process isn't just theory, isn't just abstract or conceptual. Right? This is exactly the sort of step-by-step processes that I used, right, when I trained studying for and taking these tests, And these are, so basically this course is designed by a top 1% test scorer, but this 1% test score has also taught over 7,000 students and hundreds, if not thousands of students, right, achieve, right, 99th percentile scores, And so that's really the sort of level of training that you're getting in this course, right? You'll also get repeated practice, right? Repeated practice solving many questions around one specific grammar concept or question type. And this will really help you to, if you're able to see the different ways that the SAT will test you on one specific concept, right? But we're still focusing on that one specific concept as a whole, it will really help to strengthen, right, your knowledge base of that grammar concept. Because basically, if you're able to see 10, 15, 20 questions around a singular concept that are just presented in a little bit different ways, right, it'll really help to solidify or, calcify your thinking in a very sort of organized, right, or systematic way, okay? And lastly, guys, is although, I can't guarantee 100% of the time that, everything is going to be done in a super organized and super, super neat fashion all the time, because that's never the case, right? You will learn certain tools and processes that'll really help to organize your thinking, right? And if you are an organized thinker, right, you will be able to feel like you have much more control over your test-taking experience, okay? Now, especially during times, guys, of chaos, right? So it is expected that at least a few times throughout your test, right, you are going to get confused. It's just a natural state of things, right? The SAT test makers, they're very clever with how they create these questions. So naturally, you are going to end up being confused every now and again. But during those times, what do? Do you just kind of submit or surrender to that confusion? and just kind of give up that question, right? I think not. Like, I personally don't want to do that, right? And so there are certain things that I do, right, when I am kind of confused, you know? And that's kind of the sort of things, like the tips, or the strategies, or the tools that I'll kind of show you that I apply in my sort of thinking during those times, right? That'll maybe help you to feel like you have more control, right, over the answer that you choose, okay? Now, guys, after hearing all this, right, if this kind of sounds like something that you want, right, like you want more confidence, you don't just want to know, but you want to know how to do this. If you want to try to actualize your potential and try to maximize your score, if that all kind of sounds like you, right, then guys, I think that there's no hurt in joining this course. I think that you guys will find a lot of value in this course if you have that prior knowledge of grammar that's tested on the SAT, but you just need extra focused practice around it. Okay, so I hope to see you guys in this course. I hope this presentation was valuable in some way. It gave you guys a lot of information that can help you guys decide or take that next step. And I hope to see you guys in our digital SAT classroom soon. Take care, you guys. Bye. Hey kids, welcome back. Did you guys do that review and reflection that I asked you guys to do from the previous lesson? Hopefully you guys did, because it's a game changer. You know, once you guys really fully understand what we're doing here, once you guys grasp what we're doing, it's gonna open up your eyes just to like how easy, right, and how fun the digital SAT can actually be. Right, you know, I've taught thousands of students, you guys, and I train them exactly how I train myself, right? And how I train myself is always for mastery. I don't just want to be a dabbler. I don't just want to kind of do this until I get bored and then do something else, right? I want to kind of go deep, right, and really fully understand it. Yeah, and the interesting thing is, you know, once you get to a place of mastery, this stuff becomes fun. I've had many students tell me that, oh, solving SAT grammar is fun, right? Solving the, you know, whether it's the ACT English portion, the grammar section for the ACT, like that gets fun after a while, right? The old SAT writing section, same thing, you know, and I'm sure the digital SAT is going to be no different as well, right? Because they're still testing you on the same fundamental concepts, right? They're just testing you in different ways, I think, yeah? You just have to kind of familiarize yourself with. Okay, so aim for mastery, you guys. Let's jump into the second lesson where we're just going to be more so just hammering explanations for as many questions as we can within 30 minutes. Okay, let's jump into this, you guys. Next question here. Despite the widespread belief that processed foods are inherently unhealthy, recent studies have shown certain additives such as citric acid and absorbic acid can actually help to preserve the nutritional value of packaged foods by slowing down the oxidation process. Question for you guys. Did something sound off to you when you read here, when you plugged in A? So when you're reading the sentence, you guys, yeah? Oh, one of the things I also want to add or mention is I want you guys to read with punctuation. Right, we read for punctuations as well. So what I mean by that, yes, I have to say this because there are some students who just don't even like these punctuation marks don't even register in their brains. They just like ignore them, and don't do that. You want to read with punctuation in mind as well, right? So you want to read in rhythm, right? Read with punctuation. So how that sounds, despite the belief that processed foods are inherently unhealthy. A little pause, right? Recent studies have shown, period. Ends the sentence. That's where it should sound a little bit off, right? If you're not reading with punctuation, can you see how it's going to throw you off a little bit? If you just say, recent studies have shown certain additives, right, such as this and this can actually help to preserve this, right? So you need to read with punctuation, yeah? You need to read in rhythm. Right, and what that means, reading in rhythm means reading with punctuation in mind. Okay, so a period tells you to stop fully, and then a new sentence, saying that basically one sentence ends and a new sentence begins. So you want to read like that. Okay, so that's where I ask you guys that question. If you're trying to read with punctuation in mind, something should sound very, very, very funny here. Recent studies have shown. Well, what have they shown, right? So that's where the grammatical error, right, the sentence structure error is going to appear. Okay, so that's just an observation that I made, right, while I was reading this question. Okay, so I thought I'd kind of point that out to you guys. Now, guys, so remember, a period is basically, it signals that a sentence has come to an end, right? So a complete sentence is finished. But the problem with answer choice A is we actually don't have a complete sentence, right? The reason why we don't have a complete sentence is because we don't have a complete thought. We don't have a finished idea, right? Although we have a subject, recent studies, and we have a verb, right, have shown, right, we don't have a complete thought, a finished idea. What have recent studies shown? And so it's missing the object of that verb, right? Recent studies have shown, boom, right? Certain additives can actually help to preserve this, right? So this is where answer choice A is going to be incorrect because we don't have an independent clause before the period. Now with that in mind, can you also see how we can cross off answer choice B for the exact same reason? Right? Remember, a semicolon's job, this main job is to separate two independent clauses, right? We don't have a complete sentence before the semicolon, thus we can just cross out answer choice B as well, okay? Now, another thing, you guys, answer choice D. So a couple of things to point out here. Look at the difference between C and D. Okay, so C has shown, right? And then D has shown, comma, that. And then we have the object, right? That certain, that additives, right? So here in this case, two things to know. One of the things that you should know, you guys, yeah, is a comma rule here. Okay, so one of the comma rules you should know is you should not put a comma, right, before a that clause. So what I mean by a that clause, so you know you have these sort of like statements that have the word that in them, right? So for example, if I say like, my mom says that students are smart, right? My mom says that she is a great cook, right? My teacher believes that, right, students are brilliant, right? Studies have shown that, right, certain additives can actually help to preserve the value of packaged foods. Right? So when you have that clause, yeah, you don't put a comma before it. Okay? So this will be why answer choice D is wrong, because it violates that punctuation rule. Okay? And if you guys have taken my previous courses, the concept course, right, you guys should have known that, right? Because that is something that I stress. It is something that the SAT does kind of commonly throw as a wrong answer choice, okay? So we can cross out D as well. So this just kind of leaves us with answer choice C as our correct answer, right? Now, one more thing to kind of note about C, and this is where I want you guys to kind of like, you know, make a little line next to it. Just make some kind of note next to this. Write down the term invisible, the invisible that, the invisible that clause. Okay, so this is one of the sort of ways that SAT kind of makes things a little bit trickier, right? Is sometimes, you guys, the word that in these that clauses, they're optional. Right? So for example, if I say, my mom says that students are smart, and if I also say, my mom says students are smart, right? Notice how the that is missing from the second sentence, right? Still, right, those two sentences are grammatically correct, okay? So that's where I call it the invisible that. Okay, grammatically, it's called like an elliptical clause, but you don't have to know that far. Just know that sometimes the word that is invisible, right? And that's one of the ways that the SAT is going to try to make life a little bit trickier for you, okay? So, and if you ever, one of the sort of clues tell you that, hey, maybe it is an invisible that, is you might have other answer choices, right, that have the word that or like which in it, right, with a comma or without a comma. That can be like a clue. The other way is when you're reading it, it kind of sounds like there can be a that there, right? So now that you know this information, you guys, you can now actually test it. So if you kind of think to yourself, I wonder if this is that clause, that invisible that. Try it out, right? So you can say, studies have shown that additives, right, can help to preserve the nutritional value of packaged foods, right? Studies have shown that certain additives can do this. Oh, it does work, right? So that's where you know, okay, this is the invisible that thing that they're testing me on, right? So that type of information can be very powerful, right? Because it can help you to be more confident though, right? Knowing that C is going to be the correct answer, okay? Good. Next question, you guys. Here we have long sentence, right? So let me do this, you guys. Let me show you. So for this particular example, because it is a long sentence, right? If you look at the answer choices, can you kind of tell they might be testing you on sentence structure? Maybe, right? The kind of clue that I get here, right, is the comma and, right? And then no comma, right? Because I know a comma and is like, you know, a comma plus the fanboy's word is one of the ways to properly separate two complete sentences, right? So when I kind of notice that some answer choices have the comma and, no comma, but the word and, just a comma or no punctuation. Hey guys, welcome back. Let's jump into this third lesson for the comma rules chapter, right, for this training course. Okay, so up to this point, kind of showed you the many different ways that the SAT can kind of test you on commas, right? And remember, a key point is that the SAT can oftentimes test you on more than one concept for one particular question, right? So you're going to see this trend kind of happen again and again and again, especially for questions that are more challenging, right? So for the easier questions and the medium level difficulty questions, the SAT will, you know, most of the time test you just on one concept. If they do test you on more than one concept, it'll be at a very basic level. It's when we get to like the hard level questions where the SAT is going to test you on more than one concept in kind of tricky ways. Okay, so remember, the best way to deal with that again is going to be to focus on things one thing at a time. Okay, so this particular question, you guys, number 9, reads, Dr. Amartya Sen, a celebrated Indian economist and philosopher who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998 for his groundbreaking work on welfare economics and social choice theory, continues to be a vocal advocate for human rights and has authored numerous influential books, including The Argumentative Indian, which explores the rich history of India's intellectual traditions. Okay, so the first and foremost, you guys, is we have in a positive, right at the beginning of the sentence. So this guy, Dr. Sen, a celebrated Indian economist and philosopher. So that's going to be where we have these two noun phrases again next to each other, right? Dr. Sen is your first noun. A celebrated Indian economist and philosopher is your second noun, right? And so that's the first place I'm looking at, right, in this particular sentence, is that do I want to treat this information, the appositive, as essential or non-essential? And again, remember, the way that you do that is you take a look at this first noun. Well, Dr. Sen. Well, there's only one Dr. Sen, right? There's only one Dr. Sen, right? It's the specific name of a person, right? So in that case, we have to treat this information as non-essential, right? So because there's only one Dr. Sen, this second piece, the second noun, the appositive, is going to be non-essential. So what that means is I am going to, so how I figure this out is I am going to put a comma. I need a comma here to separate Sen from the non-essential information, right? So I can cross out answer choice A there because I need the comma between Sen and a celebrated Indian economist and philosopher, okay? Now the second place that I can kind of take a look at here is going to be this part here. So I have a list of information, right? And the word and here is one of those connecting words that oftentimes is used to create a list, right? So in this particular case, because I have a list, Yeah, I gotta think to myself, well, how many items do I have in this list? Right, well here I only have 2 items, right? Indian economist and philosopher. There's only 2 items in the list, right? So when you only have 2 items in a list, you don't want to put commas between each of these items, right? So I can cross out answer choice C here because of that. Okay, now the third concept that they're testing you on here, you guys, is this who clause. This who clause, right, sorry, it should be B and C. When you have this who clause, right, like who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his groundbreaking work on welfare economics and social choice theory, right? That's called the who clause, right? The who clause is a specific type of dependent clause called a relative clause, right? The job of the who clause is going to be to give you more information about the noun that came before it, right? So really, this who clause, right, is giving you more information about this celebrated Indian economist and philosopher. That's what its job is, okay? Now, when you encounter these who clauses, you guys, yeah? Sometimes you do put a comma before these who clauses, and sometimes you don't. It just depends on the context of that sentence, okay? So now how you figure out, or how I determine if you put a comma before this who clause or not, is you really check to see what it's doing, right? So here, guys, in this particular case, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998? What this is doing here is it's specifying. It's really specifying the type of Indian economist and philosopher, right? Because there can be more than one Indian economist and philosopher, right? So which Indian economist and philosopher are we talking about? Are we talking about the Indian economist and philosopher who teaches at Harvard? Are we talking about the Indian economist and philosopher who retired at the age of 40? No. We're talking about the Indian economist and philosopher who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998. Does that make sense? So when this who clause specifies, when it specifies the type of noun that's mentioned previously, we don't want to put a comma before that who clause. We have to treat this who clause as being essential information, right? Because what this who clause does is, again, it specifies which economist and philosopher we're talking about, right? Because there can be a lot of different types of economists and philosophers, right? And so in this particular case, it's talking about the one who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998 for this particular thing. Right, so when we have that who clause that specifies the type of noun that comes before it, we want to treat that information as essential, right? So don't put a comma before it. So that's why we can cross out B. This is why D here would be the correct answer for this question, okay? So guys, this particular question, notice how there's 3 comma rules, right, that the SAT is testing you on here. So it's a harder level question for sure. Next question, you guys. Renowned film critic Roger Ebert, whose insightful reviews have entertained and informed audiences for decades, praised the visually stunning and emotionally gripping film Life of Pi, directed by Ang Lee, which tells the story of a young Indian boy stranded at sea with a Bengal tiger, and noted that the film's breathtaking cinematography and powerful performances make it a must-see for all moviegoers. Okay, so first of all, you guys, is notice how we have that a positive information. Renowned film critic Roger Ebert, right? So that, again, it's super important that you recognize this in a sentence, right? These 2 nouns that kind of appear like this, right next to each other. Renowned film critic is your first noun. Roger Ebert, the name, is your second noun, right? This is what the second noun is, what's called the appositive, and our job is to determine, is Roger Ebert essential or non-essential, right? Well, let's take a look at the first noun to figure out. So in this case, you guys, can there be more than one renowned film critic? Can there be more than one renowned film critic? Sure, there can be many, right? So he's just one of many, right? So if Roger Ebert, if there can be more than one renowned film critic, we want to treat Roger Ebert as essential information. So remember, what I do with that is I know that there's never going to be a comma that comes before the essential appositive. So I can cross out answer choices A and C immediately. Okay? Now next is sometimes there is going to be a comma, right? Sometimes this comma here is going to be necessary. It just kind of depends on the larger context of the sentence. So in this particular case, you need to have the comma after Roger Ebert, right? Because there's going to be a comma here, right, that kind of closes the non-essential information for decades, right? Now remember, you guys, I told you, you should never ever have just one comma that comes between a subject and a verb, okay? And that comma rule is so helpful. It's so good to know and apply, right? Because it's one of the most common errors for comma questions is that there's going to be a comma, like one comma, that comes between a subject and a verb, right? So we know the subject of the sentence is, right, renowned film critic Roger Ebert. That's the subject. Well, the verb of the sentence is praised, right? Hey kids, welcome to your digital SAT training course. Again, my name is Jin teacher. And guys, before we actually get started today, I wanted to let you guys know something. When you guys have put in a lot of work, like a lot of effort and time into something, I know that there can be times when you just feel like you want to quit, right? When you just feel like, man, this is just getting too hard. It's getting too boring. Like, I suck. I'm never going to get better. All those sort of doubts and worries start to creep into your head, yeah? Well, in those times, you guys, right, I think that, one thing that's really helpful, one thing that has helped me out a lot during those times of boredom, of stress, of doubt, is just this one statement, and that is, as repetition is the mother of skill. Repetition is the mother of skill. So what that really means, right, is that, hey, the more that you practice, right, the more that you repeat something, right, over and over and over again, as long as you're doing it, right, with enthusiasm and curiosity and the mindset to learn, right, you are going to become, right, a master at that particular skill, right? And so in these moments of just like you wanting to quit and you wanting to feel like, man, I just don't want to do it anymore, right? Just remember that, you guys, right? As long as you put in the repetitions, yeah, you are going to gain those skills eventually. It might not seem like it at the moment that you're practicing. It never does, but eventually the more and more that you do it consistently, right, with a positive attitude, right, eventually you are going to get to a place where, right, you do become a master at this stuff, right? So I just wanted to give you guys that word of encouragement before we kind of jump into this third chapter, right? And guys, this chapter here is all about punctuation rules. So, speaking on this topic of repetition being the mother of skill, right? Repetition being the thing that leads to mastery, we are going to encounter a series of questions, right, that test you on a variety of punctuations, right? So basically, you guys, right, the rule is really simple here. Guys, you gotta memorize your punctuation rules, right? You cannot get away with just kind of sort of knowing, these punctuation rules. Like, you have to know them like you know the back of your hand, right? Or you have to know them like you know your best friend. Yeah, so you have to build a very, very close relationship with all of these punctuations. Yeah, and there are about 8 or 9 punctuation marks that you have to know on the SAT. Okay, and you can't get around these, you guys, right? Because the SAT is going to test you and try to trick you and trap you, right, by creating, multiple, like, random questions and sentences, right, that incorrectly, uses punctuation marks and also leaves out punctuation marks that should be in place, okay? And in terms of the types of punctuation marks that we need to know, these are the ones that we have to be familiar with, you guys, right? We have to understand or know very clearly what semicolons do, periods, colons, single dashes, that's just being like one dash in the entire sentence, double dashes, that's like having two dashes in one single sentence, right? We have question marks, commas, right? And sometimes even like when not to put punctuation marks, right? So sometimes you might, sometimes the correct answer to a punctuation question could be an answer that has no punctuation marks in it. Right, so you have to, but in order for you to choose that type of answer, you have to know all of these other punctuation rules, okay? And that's really what we're gonna explore today. Now, one more point to add, right, about punctuation marks is that punctuation marks go hand in hand with sentence structure, right? So that's real simple, right? It's kind of a logical connection, right? So if you understand that a semicolon can separate two independent clauses, you can see how if we don't put a semicolon in a sentence that has two independent clauses, that could end up with a sentence structure error, right? So we can see how easily, right, punctuation marks and sentence structure, how they're kind of really well or directly related, right? It's not always the case, right? But a lot of times, right, when you have punctuation marks, you're also checking for sentence structure, okay? So remembering the sort of key concepts that we learned for sentence structure, right? These are some of the things that you must not just know how to do, but these are the things that you must actually execute on, right? These are the things that you must actually do, right, to be successful with these punctuation questions. Yeah, so remember, first and foremost, I always mention this, is awareness, right? You must recognize when the SAT is testing you on punctuation rules, okay? And secondly, can't get around this, is you have to memorize all, not some, not most, not just one, but all of your punctuation rules, okay? Also, because punctuation marks is one of those things that go hand in hand with grammar concepts like sentence structure, right, you have to make sure to read with a grammatical eye. Right? We're not just reading to understand or comprehend information, we're also reading and observing, right, how the sentence structure is built, right? And we're also noticing the different punctuation marks that appear throughout the sentence, and we're reading in that way, right? We're reading in rhythm with punctuation. And also, what's really important for punctuation rules is, or for these punctuation questions, is you want to make sure to check the context. Right, guys, context simply means the surrounding information. And on the SAT, context is king. Okay, context is king. So think about the context as being like the non-underlined words in the paragraph that you're reading. Right, that's what context is. Right, so you also want to make sure to check that information, the words that are not underlined, right, to help you to get to the correct answer. Right, students who only just kind of check the underlined portion or just check the answer choices without really being observant or noticing the non-underlined words throughout the paragraph, those types of students end up making a lot of mistakes, right? So you don't want to be that untrained, unskilled test taker. You need to check the context, right, to develop skill or mastery, right, in this subject area, okay? And lastly, you guys, remember, the process of elimination is huge, right? We can apply our understanding or our knowledge of grammar or punctuation rules to eliminate wrong answers. Why would these answers be wrong? Well, because they violate the rules of these punctuation marks that we memorized, or that we should memorize, or that we have to memorize, right? So make sure that you guys get to that as soon as possible, right? Listen, the sooner you memorize these punctuation rules, right, the sooner you memorize them, like you really, really know them, like you make them yours, right, the sooner you'll be able to start to see your scores increase, right, for the English portion of the digital SAT, okay? So with that being said, you guys, let's jump into this question set. So the first punctuation mark that you guys probably noticed is I'm really testing you guys on question marks. Okay, so I'll go ahead and read the sentence or read the paragraph first, and we'll talk about some important characteristics of question marks that you have to know. Okay, so here the paragraph reads, in a study conducted by Dr. Maria Gonzalez of the University of California, the relationship between dark chocolate consumption and blood pressure was examined. Dr. Gonzalez's research question was centered on determining, does regular consumption of dark chocolate lower blood pressure? To investigate this question, the research team recruited a sample of individuals who had normal or high blood pressure and assigned them to either a group that consumed dark chocolate daily or a control group that did not consume any chocolate. Okay, so first and foremost, you guys, notice how if you take a glance at your answer choices, notice how two of your answer choices, B and D, notice how these answers have question marks in them. And notice how answer choices A and C have a period, okay? Sometimes you might see like an exclamation point, sometimes you might see like a semicolon, but basically these other answer choices are gonna have not question marks, right? They're not gonna be question marks, okay? So why is that important to notice? Well, because this characteristic, you guys, right? Where you have a couple of answer choices that have question marks and a couple of them that don't, right, is a signal that you're being tested on, right, question marks, that punctuation rule, okay? So there's a couple of things that you have to know about the question mark concept, right? So the first thing, you guys, is really about how these questions are formed. Okay, so when you think of the word formed, just think about how they're written. Okay, so we have to understand how what are called direct questions and indirect questions are written. So guys, don't get confused with this language. It's real simple, right? A direct question is simply an explicit. Hey kids, welcome back. So we are gonna go through the second lesson of 3 lessons for the modifiers concept, yeah? So without wasting any more time, you guys, let's just jump into this, right? So you guys are starting to get the hang of these modifiers, right? So again, once you recognize the noun, once you recognize a couple of things, right? Like the different nouns that are kind of presented in the beginning of the answer choices, and the modifying phrase in the beginning of the sentence before the independent clause, right? Like these become a lot easier to handle, right? Don't they? Right, so here, same kind of thing. So here we have like the celebrated Korean artist. So here we have like the actual name of the person. That's the noun here. Here we also have the name of the person, right? Here we have that version like it is. And then D, we have like paintings is actually gonna be the noun. Well, why? Because we have Min Jae Kim's with the apostrophe S. These are just all adjectives, right? And then we have the noun paintings here. So once we see that sort of pattern, that should kind of trigger, oh, maybe I'm being tested on modifying phrases, okay? But also here, when you start to read sentences that have introductory phrases to it, your mind is going to automatically think about modifiers, or at least it should, right? So here we have a master of color and composition. Who was a master of color and composition, right? Who was a master? It has to be a person, right? Yeah, so here we have, it says, the celebrated Korean artist Min Jae Kim has earned global acclaim for his vivid and deeply expressive paintings. Okay, so again, if you think logically, guys, who is a master of color and composition? It has to be a person, right? It can't be the paintings that's a master of color and composition. A master is referring to a person, right? So this is why we can get rid of C and D, right? We don't like the it is Min Jae Kim. We would rather have an answer that just has his name first, right? Not this it is type of version. And we can get rid of paintings for D. Okay, so we're down to A and B now. Now, notice how B here does not have a verb in the sentence, right? So we don't have an independent clause. So here we have Min Jae Kim, looks like my subject. Here we have non-essential information, the celebrated Korean artist. Now we have who. So who has creates a dependent clause, not an independent clause. So even though we have a verb in here, it's not the main verb of your independent clause. It's the verb of this dependent clause here. So that still leaves us without a main verb for the entire or the main sentence, right? So this is why we can get rid of B, right? Is because we don't have a complete sentence. And this is why A would have to be your correct answer, right? For this question. Because here we have this person and we have the verb, right? Min Jae Kim has earned is your verb, right? So here we have a complete sentence, which is why A is going to be your answer for this question. Okay, cool. So guys, you notice how, I'm going a little bit more quickly through these questions, right? Simply because once you recognize what you're being tested on, yeah, like for this specific concept, it's really simple, or it doesn't take too much time, right, to kind of work through the question or the answer choices. Okay, number 6. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so here, the sentence reads, social media has transformed the way we communicate, connect, and share information. A complex and multifaceted phenomenon that has become a powerful force that shapes our identities, influences our perceptions, and profoundly impacts the ways we interact with each other and the world around us. Okay, so this one is an interesting question because it does take the modifying phrase concept, but instead of putting the modifying phrase at the beginning of the sentence, like before the independent clause, here we have the independent clause that comes before your modifying phrase, right? So in this case, you guys, you have to look at your modifying phrase as being this: a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that has become a powerful force that yada, yada, yada. Right, so the thing that comes after the independent clause, this is actually going to be your modifying phrase, okay? So here, when we have a modifying phrase that comes after, like at the end of the sentence, right, we want to make sure to keep this modifying phrase close to the thing that it modifies, right? So I can ask you that question, you guys, yeah? So what is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that has become a powerful force that shapes this? All right, well, the logical answer to that question, you guys, yeah, is clearly social media, right? Social media. So now notice here how in answer choices A and B, how we have social media that appears at the beginning of these answer choices. But then now if you look at C and D, notice how social media kind of appears at the end of the independent clause. Right? So when you have this social media, this noun that comes at the end, and then a comma, and you have this modifying phrase, this modifying phrase is referring to or modifying the noun that comes before it, right? So here, we want to make sure we can cross out answer choices A and B, right? Because we want to keep social media close to this modifying phrase. Right? Because it's social media, we want to try to keep the modifier close to the thing that they modify, right? If we can, okay? This is why I want to put social media here, right? Before, at the end of the sentence, right? Before this modifying phrase, okay? Now, nextly then, if we're now down to C and D, what else do we have to look out for? Well, we have to look out for proper sentence structure, right? Because this part of the sentence, you guys, yeah, is not going to be an independent clause. Can you guys tell that it's not an IC? It's not an independent clause, right? This is just going to be one long sort of like dependent clause, right? Here we have like a complex and multifaceted phenomenon. This is like a phrase, but when we say that, we have that dependent clause, right? Where does this end? So that has become a powerful force so we have another dependent clause that starts right here, right? That shapes our identities, influences our perceptions, and profoundly impacts the way that, so here we have another dependent clause, that we interact with each other and the world around us. So you guys kind of notice what we have here, yeah? We just have like a phrase plus a dependent clause, plus a dependent clause, plus a dependent clause, right? So we don't have an independent clause anywhere here. Okay, so that means that our independent clause has to come in this underlined portion, right? And so this is going to be why, you guys, yeah, answer choice C here is going to be correct instead of answer choice D. Well, why don't I like D? Because D doesn't have a verb, right? So here I just have communication, connection, and information sharing having been transformed by social media. Having been transformed by social media is not a verb, right? Having is not a verb by itself, right? Whereas for C, we say, the way we communicate, connect, and share information has been transformed. That's our verb, right? So here we actually have a complete sentence. This is going to be why C is going to be a better answer choice than something like D, Okay, so yeah, this one was kind of, and this is just another twist, you guys, right? You know, I haven't seen the SAT, so the way that the SAT tests you on modifiers is most of the time, it's really what you saw with question numbers 1 through 5, right? But I have kind of seen a harder level question, like the more challenging ones, right? The hard level difficulty, right? The hard difficulty questions. They're going to test you on these grammar concepts, but in kind of new and tricky ways, right? So you want to be prepared for it though, okay? I've seen it kind of test you, even though this is like not very commonly tested, right? It is a way that the SAT has tested, right, modifiers in the past. So you want to make sure to be aware of that, okay? Number 7, can you see it? Boom, Genghis Khan's impact. The impact, Genghis Khan, the person, world history. Can you see the different nouns, right, that begin the sentence, right? So here, reading the paragraph, we get to this part here. It says, despite his brutal reputation and the controversial nature of his legacy, Genghis Khan's impact on world history is undeniable, shaping the course of human civilization and leaving an enduring legacy that continues to be felt today. Okay, so here you guys, we have a modifying phrase. And don't just assume, you guys, that modifying phrases just always begin with INGs, right? That's not what I said. A modifying phrase is just a group of words that describes a noun in the sentence, right? So you have to be able to recognize this as a modifying phrase as well, right? So here you can ask yourself this question, guys. Hey kids, and welcome back to your digital SAT classroom. So guys, what we're gonna do in this part of the course, this is actually something special that I added for you guys. Initially, I designed this course just to kind of isolate, just to have like each chapter focused on one concept, right? So we went through 9 chapters. Each of those chapters focused on one specific concept or question type tested on the SAT, right? But we thought that it would be even better, right? To even give you guys more value for this course, we thought it'd be a great idea to actually add some practice tests, right? And that's really what this part of the course is gonna be about. So really though, what you guys are going to do is you're going to go from what's called deliberate practice, which means just focusing on one specific concept or question type, to now just applying everything that you learned from each of those chapters, right, into like an actual test mode, right? So now you're just going to be practicing taking the digital SAT test as if you were taking the actual thing. Now, just remember, you guys, right? Like, we're not focused on any of the reading comprehension questions, we're just focused on the writing portion, right? Like the grammar style questions, okay? So understand that this isn't gonna be exactly like you would take it on the actual test, but it will be for just the writing portion, right, of the exam, okay? And so that's really what we're gonna focus on here, you guys, yeah? So some of the things, some high-level points that I want you guys to make sure that you guys fully grasp and apply, right, on this test is, first and foremost, you guys, remember, awareness is key, right? So first of all, you have to recognize what concepts you're being tested on. Yeah, so remember, before you just start automatically reading the passage, take a glance at the answer choices, right? The answer choices can be a powerful tool to tell you what concept or question type the SAT is testing you on. Okay? Now, secondly, you guys, remember, for most of these questions, it is going to be a grammar question, right? So when you recognize the grammar concept that's being tested, then you want to make sure to read grammatically, right? Like, you're not just reading for comprehension now. Remember, you're reading for sentence structure. You're reading for proper grammar, right? Because remember, the SAT is going to 일부러 or purposefully create sentences that are not grammatically correct, right? So your job is to fix it, right? So you want to make sure to read with that sort of grammatical eye, as opposed to reading with just like a reading for just comprehension's sake, okay? Also, you guys, remember to read to the end of the sentences while just making observations. That's it, right? So you're not trying to solve the question as you read, right? But you're just reading grammatically and you're just reading to the end of that sentence, right? Now, observations that you're making could include maybe like punctuation marks, right? Maybe you notice or observe, oh, this punctuation mark isn't used correctly. Well, that's fine, right, to note or observe that, but this point is saying don't fix it, right? Don't fix it just yet. Just keep reading to the end of the sentence, right? And then after you read to the end of the sentence, right, then you go ahead and solve it though. Okay? Remember when you're doing this to also plug in answer choice A as you're reading, right? You don't just want to read the blank, like you want to actually put in something into that blanked portion, right? And also remember you guys, the SAT is notorious, right, for testing you on more than one concept for one particular question. So the way that you want to combat against that is you want to focus on one concept at a time. Okay, don't try to be superheroes and think that you're super awesome multitaskers, right? Thinking that you can do more than one thing simultaneously. Don't do that, right? Instead, you guys, right, focus on just one concept at a time. Eliminate wrong answers, right, based on that one particular concept, and also because, right, the answers that you're eliminating violate grammar rules, right? They violate the rules of grammar, okay? And so this is basically going to be the high-level things that you want to know, right, when you get into, right, test-taking mode. Okay, so that being said, you guys, let's jump into this test, right? Question number 1. Look at the answer choices. I'm thinking pronouns, pronouns, pronouns. So here it says, amidst a period of great turmoil in the US, Abraham Lincoln, a remarkable leader who has leadership skills worldwide respected, valiantly grappled with the range of daunting obstacles, including the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, which tragically culminated in his untimely death at the hands of John Wilkes Booth. Okay, so first of all, I recognize this who apostrophe S, and if you noticed how I read it, you guys, right? I read it as who is or who has, right? I read it with the sort of uncontracted or the purod version, right? The one that has the verb in it. And the reason I do that though is because it makes it easier for me to hear, right, whether it sounds correct or whether it sounds ridiculously off. Now, when I say a remarkable leader who is leadership skills or who has leadership skills were widely respected, I know this just sounds absurd, right? So I'm going to cross out answer choice A because I can't have the contraction form. Now, next, you guys, I'm also going to get rid of the that. Now, why? Because the that leadership skills were widely respected, that type of dependent clause is supposed to modify or describe things or objects. But I know this dependent clause is modifying or referring to a person. A remarkable leader is a person and not a thing, right? So I know I'm going to cross out D here, right? Because I want to choose a pronoun, a relative pronoun that actually modifies a human, not an object, right? So I'm going to get rid of D. Nextly, you guys, well, it should be pretty like the whom here, right, just makes no sense, right? So when you say a remarkable leader whom leadership skills were widely respected, right, that makes no sense whatsoever, right? When you say leadership skills were widely respected, a leader, right, or him, it makes no sense, right? Because remember, the trick that I taught you guys to make sure or to check whether whom is used correctly is replace this with like him or them, right? The object pronouns. In this case, him probably makes more sense because you're talking about one person, right? Like Lincoln. So here you should be able to make a grammatical sentence with this relative clause if this is used correctly. But when you say leader, you can't do it. There's no possible way you can do it, right? You can't say leadership skills were widely respected him, or him leadership skills were widely respected. Makes no grammatical sense, right? So I'm going to get rid of answer choice C here because it just is not grammatically correct, right? So now here, you guys, answer choice B is going to be the correct answer. Now, why? Well, B, W-H-O-S-E is what is known as the possessive form. It's the possessive form for all relative pronouns. So these relative pronouns are pronouns that create relative clauses, the ones that we just kind of took a look at, right? The ones that modify the noun that come before it. Now these relative clauses, you guys, can start with relative pronouns like who, or whom, or that, or which, right? Or whose. Whose is going to be the only relative pronoun that takes on the possessive form. Possession, right? Possession is all, okay? So when we use this correctly, we should have a noun that appears together with the whose, right, that possessive relative pronoun. So you notice that here, right? Whose leadership skills. Whose leadership skills is that noun that this possessive pronoun actually possesses or belongs to. Okay? Now here, when we're talking about whose leadership skills are we talking about? We're talking about this leaders, right? In other words, Lincoln's, right? Lincoln's or his leadership skills. Okay? So this is going to be why, you guys, B would be the correct answer for question number 1. Moving on, you guys, number 2. Take a look at the answer choices. I recognize modifiers. Now, why do I recognize modifiers? Because I have different nouns that appear at the beginning of the answer choices, right? Voice, groups, theory, and Crenshaw. Yeah, and so I recognize, I'm thinking modifier is the grammar concept that the SAT is testing me on. So now that's kind of what I'm looking for, right? Watching out for modifying phrases, yeah? So here we say, credited with originating the theory of intersectionality, which seeks to analyze how multiple identities such as race, gender, and class intersect and contribute to oppression. Kimberly Crenshaw's voice is for marginalized groups that are frequently disregarded and in mainstream discussions, including people of color, women, and members of this community. Okay, so guys, I recognize this modifying phrase at the beginning of the sentence, right? I ask myself, who is credited? Who is credited with originating this theory? Think about it. It has to be a person, right? A person is going to be the one that's given credit to originating a theory, right? So here I know immediately it can't be the person's voice. How can a voice be credited with originating a theory? It makes no logical sense, right? Same thing with these groups. It's not the groups that are credited with the theory. It's actually Crenshaw, right? So this is going to be why D is going to be the correct answer, right? Remember, you guys, for modifier questions, right, watch out for these answer choices that begin with these possessive nouns, right? These apostrophed nouns. That doesn't count as